Um, the next time you wince at the price of a carton of eggs or, stare in absolute disbelief at your heating bill, I want you to look at that receipt and realize something kind of wild.
Yeah, it really is.
You are likely paying a war tax. Like you are actually paying a premium for this silent, entirely bloodless battle that is currently being fought over, say, a microscopic silicon chip thousands of miles away.
Right, or a data server farm in some country you've never even visited.
Exactly. And I know, it sounds like a complete conspiracy theory, but the stack of research we are diving into today suggests it is simply the new math of global conflict. So, welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Our mission today for this deep dive is to ask one really fundamental question. Is the geopolitical conflict we see on the news every night still the same kind of war we read about in history books? Or has the very structure of global power shifted so radically that our old definitions are just blinding us to what's actually happening to our wallets?
And to get to the bottom of that, we really have to establish a completely different analytical lens. The sources we are working from today, they rely on this framework. It's often referred to in the research as the GOA-26 framework or the mini-fields approach.
Right.
And that demands that we prioritize, and this is a quote, structure over impression.
Structure over impression. Okay, let's unpack that right away.
Well, it means we have to stop getting swept up in the daily emotional narrative of, who is morally right or wrong in a given news cycle.
Because that's just the impression.
Exactly. That's the impression. The structure is the underlying plumbing of it all. We need to track the actual flow of power, identify exactly where pressure is building in the global system, and observe the invisible gradients driving these actors.
Gradients like what?
Like the intensity of their fear or the closing windows of time they have to act. It's about mechanics, not morality.
Okay, so we are essentially stripping away the political theater.
Yeah.
No UN speeches, no flags waving. We are just looking at the raw structural friction.
That's the only way to see it clearly, yeah.
Let's start by mapping this out then. Because, the traditional wars I learned about in school, they were always geographical. It was like playing a game of Risk.
Right, moving the little plastic pieces around.
Yeah. A nation-state wants a piece of territory, they amass a giant army, they cross a physical border, and they plant a flag. So, under this GOA-26 framework, where exactly is this new kind of war taking place?
Well, the center of gravity has completely shifted. The analysis relies on this GOA perspective, which argues that the focal point of global power is no longer the traditional nation-state fighting over, vast expanses of dirt.
Okay.
Power, and therefore conflict, has condensed into what the researchers term membrane intersections.
Membrane intersections. It sounds like we're talking about cellular biology now, not geopolitics.
The biological metaphor is actually incredibly precise here. Think of different global systems like Western financial markets, authoritarian data regimes, bleeding-edge tech supply chains. Think of them as biological membranes.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
They aren't solid brick walls like the borders of the 20th century. They're porous. Things have to pass through them for the organism to survive. So a membrane intersection is the highly specific, hyper-concentrated physical or digital point where these massive complex systems collide and overlap.
Wait, I want to make sure I'm visualizing this correctly for everyone listening. We aren't talking about, a 1,000-mile militarized border between two hostile countries anymore.
No, not at all.
We are talking about incredibly specific friction points. Like, the research explicitly points to Taiwan. It points to the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah.
It even highlights ASML, which is that Dutch company that manufactures semiconductor equipment. And it lists the physical locations of AI data centers and coastal hubs where undersea internet cables just emerge from the ocean.
And if you look closely at that list you just rattled off, a very clear pattern emerges. Taiwan isn't coveted just because it's a nice island in the Pacific.
Yep.
It is the physical intersection where the global supply of advanced microchips meets aggressive geopolitical ambition. And the Strait of Hormuz, it isn't just a narrow body of salty water. It's the exact intersection where a massive percentage of the world's energy flow is forced through a region defined by historical instability.
Let me pause you on the ASML example, though, because that one really stands out to me.
Yeah.
Taiwan and Hormuz are, physical places on a map. ASML is a corporate entity in the Netherlands.
Mm-hmm.
How does a single company become a geopolitical battlefield?
It's because ASML is the sole manufacturer of extreme ultraviolet lithography machines.
Which are?
They are the only machines on Earth capable of printing the world's most advanced microchips, so they are a membrane intersection unto themselves. The entire future of artificial intelligence, global military advancement, consumer electronics, all of it must flow through the literal doors of that specific corporation.
Oh, wow. So if that flow is restricted.
If it's restricted, the technological advancement of entire civilizations just stalls out.
Okay, that actually clarifies a major piece of this puzzle for me. So if I'm understanding this, these aren't just dots on a map anymore. They're valves.
Valves, yes.
It's not about owning the dirt under an AI data center or like claiming the water in the Strait of Hormuz for your empire. The objective is entirely about controlling what flows through that valve.
And that shift from territory to flow, that is the defining characteristic of this new era of conflict. We are no longer talking about extracting static resources like, I don't know, mining coal and hoarding it in a bunker.
Right, the old way.
We are talking about the kinetic flow of energy, the flow of proprietary technology, the flow of institutional capital, and raw data. If you control the intersection, you dictate the terms of the flow. And if you dictate the flow,
You hold leverage over the entire global system, which means we really do need a new definition for the word war. I mean, if the battlefield has shrunk from a sprawling continent down to a corporate supply chain or an undersea cable hub, how is this conflict actually being fought? Because we definitely aren't seeing massive tank battles outside the ASML headquarters in Europe.
no, we aren't. War is redefined in these texts as a sustained pressure war.
Sustained pressure war.
Right. The objective is the optimization of flow, connection, and conversion capacity at these specific intersections. Victory is no longer defined by military occupation or planting your flag in the enemy's capital city.
Because you don't need boots on the ground at an intersection to win.
Exactly. Victory is the quiet ability to stabilize your own critical connections while simultaneously destabilizing your opponent's connections.
So it's like walking up to the valve and twisting it just enough to cause your rival economic or systemic pain, but not so much that you break the pipe and destroy the flow that you also rely on.
That delicate manipulation of pressure is the essence of modern conflict. And it introduces a massive complication regarding who is actually doing the fighting.
Here is where it gets really interesting to me. The actors. Wait, if war is now about controlling a corporate supply chain or an energy valve, are you seriously suggesting that the CEO of a tech company or like the board of an infrastructure firm has the same geopolitical weight as a sitting president?
In the context of membrane intersections, they often have more.
That's crazy.
The research argues that corporations, technology platforms, capital markets, and infrastructure operators are taking on what they call quasi-sovereign roles.
Quasi-sovereign.
Yeah, think about it. If a major tech platform decides to cut off data flows to a specific country, or if an infrastructure operator decides to suddenly reroute an undersea cable, they are executing maneuvers that have the exact same economic impact as a traditional military blockade.
I'm struggling to see where that leaves traditional governments then. Do nation-states just, retire? Let the Fortune 500 run global diplomacy?
Well, they don't retire, but their job description is radically rewritten. The state transitions from being primarily a warfighter raising armies to conquer land, to acting as a manager, a defender, and a strategic agent of these intersections.
So the state is basically a heavily armed security guard for a supply chain.
Pretty much. A modern government's primary existential task is to ensure its civilization has uninterrupted access to these vital flows and to militarily or legally defend the intersections its economy relies on.
So we have this world defined by these highly concentrated valves, and we have states and megacorporations constantly jockeying to tweak the pressure. I mean, that sounds like a recipe for constant unpredictable volatility.
It absolutely is.
Why are these specific intersections so prone to explosive conflict? The sources dedicate a lot of space to the structural forces causing this, which they call the mechanics of friction, or MGF.
Yes, MGF. These structural forces are critical to understanding why the global system feels so unstable to all of us right now. The framework identifies three distinct mechanisms of friction. The first one is called shear.
Shear. Let me guess. We're talking about speed differences,
You
right?
got it.
It makes me think of, it's like shifting a bicycle into the highest possible gear while you're trying to pedal up a steep, muddy hill.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, the global market is trying to spin the back wheel at 100 miles an hour, but the physical supply chain on the ground simply cannot rotate that fast, and eventually the chain just snaps.
That is exactly it. Shear is the friction generated when systems operating at fundamentally different velocities collide. Consider the speed of algorithmic financial trading or the exponential iteration of artificial intelligence.
Light speed.
Literal light speed. But they are inevitably tethered to slow systems, physical geography, demographic aging, heavily regulated local labor markets, and, traditional sluggish diplomacy.
So it's like millions of dollars of high-frequency trades being executed in milliseconds, but they are completely dependent on a physical cargo ship that is currently stuck in a physical port because of a local labor strike. The speed of finance crashes into the reality of geography.
And that crash generates immense structural heat at the intersection, which leads to the second force they detail, compatibility errors.
Okay, compatibility errors. What does that look like?
This occurs when global operational systems clash directly with deeply rooted local cultures or sovereign regulations.
Give me a concrete example of that because it sounds a bit abstract. Like, how does a culture clash with a supply chain?
Okay, imagine a massive global technology platform that relies on a universal standard for data sharing and content moderation to maintain its revenue flow.
Like any major social media network.
Right. Now imagine that platform intersecting with a regional government that passes strict new laws based on local cultural norms, perhaps stringent privacy protections, or religious restrictions on certain types of speech.
The platform can't easily adapt without breaking its own global architecture.
Exactly. It isn't a military standoff with tanks, it's a systemic incompatibility. The global operational system simply cannot parse the local code, and this leads to a massive compounding error.
Which usually ends how?
Often in a hard economic decoupling, sudden bans, or the destruction of billions of dollars in market value literally overnight.
Wow. Which brings us to the third, and frankly, I thought the most ominous structural force mentioned in the research, calcification.
Yes, calcification.
When I read this part, I immediately thought of tectonic plates.
Tell me more about that.
Well, if you stand on a fault line, the surface looks completely peaceful. The birds are singing, the ground is still. But miles beneath your feet, two massive plates are grinding against each other, getting snagged. It looks quiet, but the pressure is building exponentially.
The tectonic analogy captures the danger perfectly. In this paradigm of intersectional warfare, silence is not peace. Silence is a warning siren.
Wait, I want to make sure I understand that. You're saying a lack of visible conflict is actually a red flag.
In many cases, yes. If an intersection is vital to global flow, there should be constant dynamic negotiation. There should be minor price fluctuations, diplomatic back and forths, small policy adjustments.
It should be breathing.
Exactly, it should be breathing. If a vital membrane intersection goes completely silent and stagnant, it usually means the normal, healthy mechanisms for releasing pressure have failed. The intersection is calcified. It is simply storing kinetic energy, waiting for a catastrophic rupture.
So an astute observer isn't just watching the news for where the bombs are actively falling. They're looking for the critical valves that have gone disturbingly quiet.
Precisely. We're looking for where the pressure is trapped.
Okay, we've established a fascinating, albeit slightly terrifying, new map of the world here. We've got these invisible tectonic plates of tech, finance, and resources grinding against each other at these highly specific valves. We've got speed shear, compatibility errors, and calcifying pressure.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. But if you're listening to this right now, maybe you're commuting to work or folding laundry, you are probably asking the ultimate question. So what?
Right. How does this affect me?
Exactly. Most of us do not manage an undersea data cable. We don't sit on the board of a semiconductor monopoly in the Netherlands. How does this abstract structural shift in geopolitics actually jump the gap and reach my personal bank account?
This is where the framework leaves the realm of political science and enters your daily reality. The texts are explicit about this transmission mechanism. They call it the GOA-26.5 concept. The front line of this new war extends straight into your daily expenditures.
Let's walk through that mechanism, because earlier in the intro, I mentioned the idea of a grocery receipt being a war tax. I want to prove that to the listener right now. Show me the exact causal chain from a distant intersection to the price of my eggs.
Okay, let's use the Strait of Hormuz as our micro scenario.
Okay.
Step one is the introduction of pressure at the intersection. Say an autonomous drone flies aggressively close to a commercial shipping vessel in the strait.
But the ship isn't hit. No cargo is lost. Nothing physical has actually changed in the world.
Nothing physical, no. But the structural integrity of the flow has been threatened. And that brings us to step 2, uncertainty. The market suddenly doesn't know if the valve will remain open tomorrow.
Right.
Step 3, the insurance underwriter sitting at a desk at Lloyd's of London sees that drone footage on Twitter. They understand the risk has escalated, so they immediately triple the insurance premium for any vessel passing through that intersection.
And the shipping company isn't going to just absorb that massive new cost out
Yeah.
of the goodness of their hearts.
Of course not. That's step 4. The operational costs for the shipping corporations skyrocket. Step 5, the shipping company passes that increased freight cost onto the regional distributor. And step 6, the distributor passes it to the local grocery store, who changes the price tag on the carton of eggs.
I really want to linger on this because it completely shatters how we are traditionally taught about inflation. Like in Econ 101, we are taught that prices go up when there is a physical shortage of a good or when too much money is printed. But you're saying prices can skyrocket even if there is absolutely no physical shortage of oil or eggs simply because an intersection got tense.
Yes. Price is no longer merely a simple equation of supply and demand. In this new era of sustained pressure warfare, price acts as an insurance premium on the reliability of flow.
That is a staggering concept.
Yeah.
An insurance premium on the reliability of flow. I am literally paying out of pocket for the mere possibility that a distant valve might close.
You are absorbing the geopolitical risk of the entire global system. And the research maps out exactly how this wave of uncertainty washes over the consumer's life. It isn't a random spike. It hits in a very specific chronological cascade.
Oh, there's a timeline to it. Walk me through the cascade. Where does the wave hit first?
The first wave always hits energy. Energy flows are the most hypersensitive to intersection pressure. You will see near immediate spikes in the cost of electricity, natural gas, and heating fuels. The sources note this is a particularly visceral shock if you live in a colder climate where energy isn't a luxury. It's survival.
Okay, the heating bill goes up first. What's the second wave?
Logistics and transport. The cost of physically moving anything from point A to point B skyrockets. Shipping rates multiply, delivery times lag, and corporate supply chains become incredibly expensive to maintain.
Which naturally triggers the third wave. Because if it costs more to move things, it costs more to feed people.
Yes, the third wave is food. But it's not just the transport of the finished product, like getting the bread to the store.
Oh, right.
Modern agriculture is essentially a derivative of energy. It relies heavily on petroleum-based fertilizers and massive energy inputs to operate the harvesting machinery. When the energy valve tightens, crop yields become vastly more expensive to produce from the ground up, so the price of a loaf of bread jumps.
Energy, logistics, food. That leaves the fourth and final wave.
Housing.
See, I have to push back here. I can wrap my head around my gas bill or my groceries fluctuating based on global shipping. But how on earth does a conflict at an intersection halfway across the world affect my rent or my mortgage?
It happens through 2 distinct channels. First, the raw materials of construction, lumber, steel, copper. They rely entirely on those global logistics networks that just became wildly expensive.
Okay, that makes sense.
But the second, much larger impact is through interest rates.
Right, because central banks step in.
Exactly. When intersection shocks cause systemic inflation across energy and food, central banks attempt to cool the economy by raising interest rates. So, the direct byproduct of that drone flying near a ship in the Strait of Hormuz is that borrowing money to buy a house or secure a construction loan to build an apartment complex becomes prohibitively expensive. Your mortgage rate is directly tied to the stability of the membrane intersection.
Wow. Let's bring those structural forces, the mechanics of friction we discussed earlier, back into this economic reality. Because you mentioned shear earlier, that massive speed difference. How does shear play out in my wallet?
Think about the velocity of a global financial market versus the velocity of your biweekly paycheck.
Very different speeds.
Right. Shear in the domestic economy means that when an intersection gets tense, the financial markets instantly price in the risk. The cost of living goes up overnight, commodities spike in milliseconds. But the slow system, your wages, corporate payroll budgets, long-term employment contracts, that lags far, far behind.
So the global market punishes me at light speed, but my raise at work takes a year to negotiate.
Exactly. And that painful lag brings us to the economic manifestation of calcification. Once those prices go up to absorb that insurance premium on uncertainty, they become incredibly sticky.
Meaning, even if the news cycle moves on and everyone forgets about the drone, the prices refuse to come back down.
If the underlying structural vulnerability of the intersection hasn't been resolved, the market will refuse to drop the risk premium. The immediate military posturing might fade from the headlines, but the prices calcify at a permanently higher plateau.
That's depressing.
It is, but it's the reality. The true lasting cost of this new type of war isn't tallied in destroyed buildings. It is fought through the permanent, quiet restructuring of your daily living costs.
It is a profoundly sobering way to look at the world. I mean, we aren't watching the war on the evening news. We are financing it every time we swipe a debit card. It completely recontextualizes economic pain.
It really does.
It forces us to stop seeing a high grocery bill merely as a failure of local domestic policy and start seeing it as a direct symptom of global structural friction.
It demands that we become structural observers of our own lives.
We have covered a massive amount of ground today. We've deconstructed the geography of power, redefined warfare entirely, and traced a direct line from geopolitical theory to the price of a carton of eggs.
We definitely covered the map.
But keeping with the strict spirit of the mini-fields framework we've been using, which demands we stay analytical, objective, and focused on structures rather than comfortable narratives, we are not going to wrap this up with a tidy conclusion.
We really shouldn't. I mean, the goal of this analysis isn't to predict exactly how or when a specific conflict will end. The goal is to provide a new set of coordinates for observing the world as it changes around us.
Exactly. Understanding these membrane intersections isn't just an academic parlor trick for foreign policy wonks. It is the practical equivalent of anticipating your future cost of living. But as we look out at the horizon, this research leaves us with massive, unresolved structural questions.
And these are the questions that should really be framing how we all consume information going forward. For instance, which intersection matters next?
Right.
We are all hyper-aware of Taiwan and Hormuz, but where is the next quiet calcifying valve? What obscure mineral bottleneck or digital gateway is currently storing immense pressure without anyone noticing?
And what about the massive global push to build alternative supply chains? Like, every major power right now is trying to onshore manufacturing and build redundant tech sectors. Are we actually avoiding war by doing that, or are we simply creating entirely new, highly volatile membrane intersections?
That is the critical tension. It forces us to reconsider the fundamental motives of these global powers. In this new era, are civilizations actually competing to achieve a definitive historical victory, or have they realized that total victory is impossible, and they are now permanently fighting merely to optimize their control over the flows?
It changes everything about how you read the morning headlines. So we're going to leave you with a final thought to mull over. The next time you are running errands and you are hit with a sudden, inexplicable spike in prices at the gas pump or the hardware store, don't just complain about local politicians or look for an empty shelf. Look deeper. Look for the friction, the shear, and the invisible pressure building at a distant, silent valve.
The flow has been disrupted.
And you are paying the premium.